Do you miss the days of when you had your game console on you at all times and you're able to just sit down, not worry about patches or updates, and just game? The Powkiddy RGB10MAX3 is so bare bones, but in a pretty good way. That bare bones sit down and game mentality is what we're looking at today. It doesn't have a touchscreen, it doesn't have a ton of crazy features, but for around $100, it provides you with quite a bit of gaming. So, today we are talking about the Powkiddy RGB10MAX3. Yes, the naming convention is horrible, and the company sounds like it's beaten up a child, or a cat. But today we're looking at this blue translucent handheld emulator that is in the style of a PSP and around the same size, but has a lot more features.
Hold on.
Remember, we are giving away a Retroid Pocket 3 at the end of this month, which is April. Go check the community tab at the end of April to see who has won. We are giving away a Steam Deck with the modded blue shell in May, so make sure you're subscribed if you'd like to be eligible for that. We'll be giving it away to one of the subscribers.
Go ahead.
Let's look at the physical overview of the device.
And this thing is kind of weird. It's flat on the bottom and round on the back, but it feels great. The ABXY buttons are squishy and not clicky. We have two sunken in joysticks that are the size of Joy-Con joysticks, and they have a click, which is clicky. The D-pad is nice and large and is squishy and not clicky. The start and select buttons are clicky and not squishy. There are no buttons on the bottom, but we have two USB-C ports, a headphone hole for headphones, two SD card slots, in addition to two speaker grills with no speaker covering behind them, so dirt will get in these for sound to get out. And I say get out because when we take this thing apart, the speaker cabinets are just firing directly into the device. Now, all the sound does come out the bottom, which is nice, but it'd be better if these were ported directly down to the bottom and had some grills on them so these won't get filled with chud. And on the top we have the L1 and R1 bumpers, which are clicky and not squishy, and we have the L2 and R2 triggers, which are squishy and not clicky. We have the volume up and down, which is clicky and not squishy, a mini HDMI port out so you can hook this up to a TV and play that way if you'd like, and a power and reset button that are clicky and not squishy. There are nothing on the sides of the device or the back except a fancy looking battery casing.
Now that we got the hardware out of the way, this paint job is very interesting because in real life this looks matte, and online a lot of the pictures have been glossy. And this is kind of an odd shape on the top and bottom because they are flat, which we do actually have stands for. So if you're interested in a hollow stand, which I've been making them down below, leave me a comment if you'd be interested in picking one of these up. It sits very well just by itself, but also feels good when you grip those two little nubs on the back. And I think they did this so that it didn't feel all weird, because if you kept the back just flat and slipped it in your pocket, it would be kind of too short on the top. PSP is just a hair bigger than this, but the dimensions are really only a part of this. Let's look at the software and what this Linux operating system can provide us, which it's running Jealous OS. Let's emulate.
Now this device can do a lot of things with emulation. We are running Jealous OS and it's running a lot of the other cores from RetroArch, in addition to running PPSSPP, the PSP emulator, and Drastic for DS emulation. Now this being a Linux-based emulator here, we have everything laid out per system, and then each one is going to launch based on what device you're picking. So if you pick any, like the Sega Game Gear, it's going to end up being picked and then launched whatever core and backend that it needs. Now this is all done pretty well and laid out very nicely, but there is no other OS you can launch into how this device is set up currently. As for the power of this device, the arcade machines, the 8-bit handheld consoles, and the 16-bit consoles all run very well on this device. The screen is big enough and has enough resolution. It's only up to 720p resolution, but it's a small screen and all of these games scale pretty well. Now, after those eras of games, we get into stuff that is a little bit harder to emulate. So we get into like the N64 era, where not all of the games will run perfectly at like double the FPS, but most of the games that came preloaded here, I didn't have any issues with. They all ran smoothly and were playable. Now we get into harder stuff like the Nintendo DS to emulate. And this is kind of where the device starts to fall apart. Most of the collection in Nintendo DS games will be playable, but this is not a touchscreen device. So anything you're playing on here, just remember that you can play both screens and it's easily swappable with the triggers, so you don't have to mess with any of the settings. You could just play and swap the screens as you will right out of the box. But anything that's going to need a stylus or anything like that, you will either have to mod the ROM or just know that you won't be able to use the touchscreen features with this device. Now you can map a stick to do this, but it's kind of a pain in the butt. Now this gets us into the PSP, and for this it runs a lot of the games, but it will not pass the God of War test. So a lot of these games need a little bit more power to run these, and this rock chip that we have in here is not going to run the entire collection perfectly. Now it will run a lot of these, but this device is kind of on the same power level as the Anbernic RG35XXH, where it'll play the games, but it won't play all of them. So if you're looking for a replacement PSP emulator that'll play everything perfectly or even upscaled, this is not what you're looking for. This has a little bit less power than that, and you'll be able to play a lot of the collection, but not the entire PSP collection, or even any of the games sped up.
So, this device is in an interesting category because it's around $100, and LITNXT.com sent this over to me for a review unit, so the link to grab it from there will be down in the description. Now, this did come with a preloaded game library. In addition, you can load your own games and ROMs on there, which I recommend you do. But the software to me was a little bit lacking. For $100, you can go and pick up an old PSP, or you could pick up an old DS and refurb it and do a complete shell swap. Now, if you're not looking to do tinkering and you're just looking to play the old games without having to dive into, being an electronics refurbisher, I think this does have a value proposition where it plays DS and most of your PSP titles pretty well. Doesn't play all of the PSP titles. Not having a touchscreen for the DS is kind of weird too, so it doesn't play either of its top consoles fully, which is kind of odd to me. Now, the controls feel fantastic, and all of it functions right out of the box, which is very nice, but it's kind of a weird experience. Now, if you're just getting this to play, like, Game Boy Advance games for $100, it's not a bad screen, and it's not a bad control scheme, and it fits in your pocket pretty well, but for $100, you get into the territory of different Anbernic devices, different Miyoo Mini devices. There's a ton of competition in this category, so I'm not quite sure why they wanted to put another $100 handheld out. Even some of their own consoles compete with this, like the 10 Max. I can't even remember the names at this point. The big square one, which that one's cool. This also runs Pico 8 and a bunch of other stuff. So it's interesting. You're really just picking your form factor when it gets down to it. If you didn't like the big square one, this may be more of your speed, but it's going to have around the same power. So here's what I like about the device. I think the controls and the scheme of this device is great. I think all of the buttons are very tactile and nice to play with. In addition to them using a matte finish instead of the glossy one. I think this matte finish on the device lets you see inside of it, but then also doesn't get in a way of itself. It lets you play the games and play it as a device versus getting distracted by all the cool stuff on the inside, which when it's off, that's what you want to be interested in looking at, and you can still do that. And what I don't like about this device, which is the power to cost ratio. If you're looking for something that you just want to sit down and play games on, I think for around $100, it's not that bad. If you're getting the devices set up and ported for you right to your door versus having to buy a console, buy old cartridges, and figure out how to get your library up and running and all that stuff. Now, if you have like an old Vita or an old PlayStation Portable, an old Nintendo DS, buying one of those multi-cartridges and throwing one in there may be better off for you, or hacking the PSP to play all sorts of games that you want from an SD card there. Now, you get into other stuff where like the batteries aren't that great anymore and all that kind of stuff. It's older hardware versus something that's brand new and can charge via USB-C. It doesn't have power delivery, so it doesn't charge fast, but it does have USB-C charging. These are the caveats. I think the device feels fantastic, but the software and power level for me is a little bit lacking. Other than the fantastic controls and all the other things that I've mentioned, this is an interesting price category because if you don't know anything else about handheld emulators, here are a few different videos that I think you should check out because they're in the same price category. Either the Miyoo Mini, the Anbernic devices, or another Powkiddy device would be up your alley, or at least in consideration, because this is a crowded market space, and for $100, there are some other options you can get, which are one of these. Take them, give them a smell, fold them up, put them in your pants pocket, save them for later. Whatever you want to do. Cora is making the barks. Bye.